Let me talk for a few minutes about embodiment and what it isn't and what it is. Because I think that many people, it's another term, isn't it, that's bandied around, that's thrown about as if it means something like this. But like all of these things now, these memes, these words, these phrases, they get diluted, they get misunderstood, they get thrown around the internet. And in that sense, the essence of them gets lost. We see it in awakening, the word awakening. We see it in the phrase non-duality. We see it everywhere in everything. So let's talk about embodiment. When it needs to happen, what is it and what isn't it? For a start, embodiment, at least in the way that we talk about it, is not about the body necessarily. It's not just this simple idea that embodiment is where awakening comes just into the body somehow, and that's it. It's much more intimate, and it's much deeper, and it's much more profound. And in many ways, embodiment has nothing to do with awakening. Of course it can have. It comes from a kind of idea, I think, that, in the last 20 years or so, since spirituality, since non-duality, since the whole conversation about awakening has become more contemporary, and that what was seen in a lot of the non-dual circuit, particularly as it was in California in like 2015, 14, 13, 16 and 17 and 18, where there were a lot of conversations about non-duality. And many different teachers in many different ways. The Science and Non-Duality Conference was built on an exploration of non-duality that also included the quantum science, for instance, view of the universe. So these two things folded into each other in a big and profound ongoing yearly conversation about non-duality and the realization of the union and unity of all things. However, there was eventually there was a wave that started coming up, which was almost, yes, that's all well and good, but what about the living of it? How does that relate to the human condition? How does that relate to social life? How does that relate to political life? How does that relate? I remember there was a lot of stuff coming out in California at that time about activism, and that activism was over here, and non-duality and the whole spiritual conversation was over here, and never the twain shall meet. So in some senses, the Science and Non-Duality Conference was starting to become aware, I think, of a certain schism, a certain distance, a certain kind of separation between those, and out of that, or within that, somehow, and I wasn't part of it. Amodama was a speaker at that conference for a few years. In fact, she wrote a book called Embodied Enlightenment way back in 2016, 2017, I think it was, that spoke to this, but that's probably a little bit ahead of its time. And then after 3 or 4 years, it started to become a more talked about conversation, because there was a realization that you could talk about non-duality all you like from the mental standpoint. There's nobody here, there's nothing going on. The perennial non-dual sort of conversation. But it didn't mean anything ultimately. It was just a lot of ideas and a lot of theory and a lot of philosophy, but it wasn't entering the human condition in terms of relationship with body, relationship with other, relationship with family, relationship with work, relationship, as I said, with politics, with social activism even. How do these things relate to each other? By and by, here we are in 2026, and the conversation has changed in some ways and still not changed in other ways, because, and this is where I'm going with this, embodiment, the living of spiritual realization, is where the rubber hits the road. And where the rubber hits the road is the most difficult aspect of spiritual realization, period. Because it suddenly, the theory becomes real. It enters the relationship, of course, with the body, but it also enters the relationship of how we are with other people, how we are with the world, how we're moving around in the world, how is awakening, how is realization showing up in our everyday life, in our day-to-day life, in the minutiae of our living. Because if it's not showing up there, then it's dissociated or something is bypassed, which is where that term came from. The denial, the pushing away of the shadow because I've seen the light. The light is all there is. Non-duality is all there is. Oneness and union is all there is. Don't tell me about the shadow because it's not real. And yet here it is, the shadow turning up again and again and again, manifesting itself in all sorts of tricky and convoluted ways. And we see this, and we've seen this in many, I would say, spiritual stroke religious teachers over the years, over the decades, where the realization is there, but the shadow is still showing up. The lived life, the self is still showing up. So there's some sort of a schism between the lived experience and the realization. This is why I'm always and only really interested in talking about what this lived experience means, because it seems that the lived experience is where it's at. And so any realization, or you see, the thing is, the realization doesn't need to come before the embodiment. You don't need to wait to become enlightened before you start living as the light of your being. You don't need to wait for, the all singing, all dancing, trumpet sounding, great moment of epiphany after epiphany of the light before you start living as the truth, or the love, or the peace, or being true, or being kind, or being honest, or just being damn real with yourself and with other people, and facing what needs to be faced. This is why the myth, the idea of embodiment, that somehow we have to see the light and then it filters, almost as if by itself, into the human relationship, the physical experience, the physical body, and the relationships, almost without effort or without any trouble. And that's just not what happens. That's just not what happens. Because as soon as any realization happens, or as soon as there's any intent or longing for the light, even without that, the human experience is begging us to open to integrate, to heal. Now, if we are totally self-fixated, then we're going to get attached to the human experience. Me, my body, me, my life, me, my relationships, me, I need to fix it, I need to heal it before I can blah, blah, blah. And that's not ultimately very helpful either. So this is very much a synthesis of a deeper realization and the human experience. But if there's been any awareness, any glimpse, any, and it doesn't even have to be massive, like I keep saying, just something. Just even these words ignite something. But then we get through our very human experience, through the human experience itself, we get to see and we get to become aware of the patterns, the holding patterns, the distortions within us, the hiding places, the shadow, the grievances, the vulnerability, the anger within us that is being neglected, that is pushed to the sidelines because it's too painful and we don't like it, and everybody else pushes their stuff away, so I'd better push my stuff away as well. And so we get caught in this endless looping of the divided human condition. And ultimately, I would say that embodiment is the seeking and the living of the end of that divided human being experience within you, within me, within each of us, so that then we can come home to a different sort of integrity, a different sort of way of being in the world, which is natural and harmonious. It doesn't have to be filled with light and love, it just has to be true within us, so that we're living from our center, so that we're living from our integrity, we're living from our intuition, and nothing is pushed away. Because as long as we're pushing away some part of our human experience, then no matter what realization we have, it's not going to enter the lived experience. So it'll stay as a realization that we want to hold on to, but it won't actually have become integrated. And this is not much use. If it's not flowing into our lives, it's really not much use. It's like reading a book, putting it down. And so then it does become difficult, because the human condition is tenacious and rigid and self-protective and stuck. And it goes round and round and round, and certain mechanisms that we've built over the years, protective mechanisms that have become prisons, and we live by those, and we're filled with fear. Fear of death, fear of life, fear of pain, fear of the past, fear of the future. Everywhere we go within the human condition, we know we experience fear. And yet that fear is either left unconscious, in which case it drives us in a certain way, drives our behaviors through the shadows, still tugging at us, still pushing in certain directions of avoidance or addiction, or moving towards this or that. Or else we start to make it conscious, in which case it feels much more difficult, but at least we're developing some maturity and bravery and grit, some spiritual grit, some spiritual oomph, which sadly is very lacking in many. So embodiment, yes, it does enter. Yes, we do enter the body, of course. Body is a great holder of tight nervous system energy. The body is a very locked up inner system that needs to flow, that wants to flow. The chakra system, for most people, way out of whack. Most of the chakras, if they're such a things, or one can say this sort of thing, are either spinning in the wrong direction or completely offline. The bottom three chakras particularly, root chakra, life force, power, life force, drive. Sacral chakra, emotions, buried, offline, inaccessible. Solar plexus, the fire, the will, intuition. Maybe intuition is the one below it. But all of these things, I will, my will, whether my will is in service to myself or to some greater good. And the heart chakra and the throat chakra, all offline, or not offline, but distorted. Not really flowing freely. This unit, this experience, this human organism is intended to flow freely. Its energy up, down, up and out and back. But it doesn't. So yes, the body system, the liver, all of these things, whatever you're going to point to, we can talk about it, of course. And so the body does need to be attended to, not in some fixing kind of way, but to be loved and to be opened to, so that the body releases the old patterns. And the old patterns have emotional stuckness in them, but also physical stuckness in them. And of course, our beliefs and our values and our opinions are also inherently connected to all of those things, to the emotions and to the body. So then it starts filtering into how we are in the world, how we relate to other people and the world. This is embodiment, not some woo-woo stuff and ideas. How we relate to other people in the world. Are we relating to other people through a veil of hiding? Or are we relating through honesty and openness and a certain vulnerability, but certainly also a courage to be who we are and to listen to ourselves and to have that inner integrity? And that's a journey. These are journeys. Embodiment is a journey. In fact, embodiment is an ongoing journey that never stops, because we wake up every day fresh, new, or else we just carry the old bags around day after day. And so embodiment, into the lived experience is a calling, a daily, moment by moment, in effect, relationship by relationship. How am I relating? How am I experiencing? Am I avoiding? And this is not neurotic. This is just an awareness. Awareness of ourselves. Awareness of where we're really hiding. Awareness and truth. Awareness, truth, kindness, honesty, willingness, courage. These are all the beautiful values. Not some other nonsense somewhere. To really bring it home, to bring the spiritual journey home to ourselves. And the reason that I'm emphatic here in this video is because I'm just seeing so much nonsense on YouTube and around that has kind of these strange ideas about spirituality, that it's almost like I don't even recognize it, man. So bring it home, bring that spirituality into the body, into the lived experience. You don't have to wait. It's now. It's now. It's always now. Don't wait. Done with waiting. Lived experience is here now. It'll always be here now. It'll always be an invitation, because we get closer and closer to death. And death is the final calling card. How do you meet it? How do you open to it? Are you going to fight with it? Or are you going to meet it with a certain grace or depth or honesty that doesn't deny the sorrow or leaving loved ones, leaving this place of shadows and light? But to know that that's another aspect of embodiment. Ultimately, it's ironic that when we die, we leave the body. But ironically, that's the moment when the invitation is, how have we inhabited our bodily experience, our lived experience? Because if we've met it and lived it fully, then the releasing of it will be easier. So I've said enough about embodiment and the lived experience. So bless you. Thank you so much for listening and watching.